Thanks for joining us for our next installment of our small group study. We've been going through the New Testament, and today we're going to be talking about the miracles of Jesus' ministry. Chad, would you mind reading for us in John chapter 2?
Yeah, so starting in verse 6. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
C.S. Lewis talks about the miracles of Jesus being something that reveals the Father, and reveals not only the heart of the Father, but just the nature and character of the Father. Do you see any of that here in this miracle?
Well, obviously this is a wedding feast, and both weddings and feasting in general seem to play a fairly prominent role in the Old Testament and have great importance.
Mm-hmm.
These are supposed to be times of great joy, and for Jesus to play a role to facilitate that maybe shouldn't be surprising.
It's interesting to me that the scripture says that God gave us wine to make glad the hearts of men. And wine is something that gets made out of water every day in a very slow process. And we attribute that to what? Someone was at a wedding and they were to drink a glass of wine. What would they attribute the joy to? What would they attribute the taste to? What would they attribute the properties of wine to? What would, in their mind, what are they?
Well, you know, as a chemist, I get very reductionist on this. But like, well, it's the ethanol, and when the ethanol goes into your bloodstream, it gets oxidized to acetyl. You know, and I'll go down the list of,
Right,
you know,
right.
but that's not really. I don't think where the average person's going, but I think they might go.
But they're going
somewhere
someplace like
and maybe some, you know, it's fermented fruit or, you know.
Right. So they attribute that to the qualities of the physical properties of the grapes, right? And the process. But in Scripture, what is that attributed to?
To God.
To God. And so what you see happening in this miracle is that you see Jesus doing. He's revealing the Father in a way that the time has been compressed, and the authorship cannot be doubted. Largely because the time has been compressed. And so when Jesus says, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father," there's an element of his miracles just being an amazing part of this, that this is, rather than attributing wine or any blessing that we have to, oh well, isn't it great that today is not so hot? Isn't it great that you know, the water feels so cool? Isn't it great? Those in the Bible are not attributed to the qualities or properties of the material. They're from the hand of God, and so God is the one who deserves the praise. Now, if we take that into our life, what does that change?
It changed everything. I mean, if we see blessing around every corner and stuff like that, if I walk into an air conditioning building in August and I'm just like, thanks God that you planted this idea in the heads of men, you know, and I mean, how would that not, you know, increase the amount of joy you experience on a daily basis to a significant degree?
One of the things that's kind of interesting is if you look at another one of the miracles, if you look at the feeding of the 5,000, that again is one of those miracles that is done without very much pomp and circumstance and flourish. It's just kind of a matter of fact, here we go. And yet it also kind of follows in with this idea of revealing a God of something that God does every day. What is it that the feeding of the 5,000 is revealing to us about the character of God?
That God is fruitful, you know, and he can take a little and turn it into much, and uses it as provision for his people.
Yeah, that it's a fascinating thing that you can take a few seeds and plant them and end up with a harvest big enough to feed a family through the winter. You know, it's amazing that fish on their own will do what they do, and they'll produce a bounty that's enough for not only our needs, but beyond to have abundance. When we have a feast, that's kind of what we're doing. And it's also fascinating that you have a situation where bread and fish are there in this lunch. I don't know that that's coincidence. It could have been, he could have had some bread and a mutton chop or something like that. But he has bread and fish. What do you see going on with that?
So the fish being maybe the sea and representing Gentiles, and the
Yeah.
bread being the Jews.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's interesting that you have this idea of the body being composed of something that represents the Gentiles and something that represents the Jews. And so even in that aspect, Jesus is revealing the character and nature of God. And this is really all through all of the miracles that Jesus does, all through his ministry. One of the more difficult ideas or one of the more difficult miracles to understand is really the only destructive miracle that Jesus does, which is the withering of the fig tree. What's at play in that?
I don't know if I know the real answer, but it's actually something I thought about recently. And the fig tree is representative of Israel at times, and and here there's this fig tree that doesn't have any fruit, and here Jesus curses it, and it withers up and dies. And if you kind of look at the context of Scripture surrounding that passage, it also talking about the destruction of the temple and things of this sort. And I wonder, we might take something general away from there, but we might also take an allusion to if the people of the covenant aren't going to produce fruit, then they're going to be they're going to wither and die.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on with that miracle. And the first aspect is the destructive nature of the miracle, but fig trees die all the time. And the thing is, when we look at it, we go, oh, well, something happened to that fig tree. And again, it's down to the property of the tree itself. We don't think of it as
Just compressing time again.
well, yeah, compressing time. But I mean, when we see just a normal fig tree, just or any kind of tree, oh, that tree's dead. Something must have happened to it. But we don't attribute that to God. That God sets the times for things. That He allows things to be raised up for a certain period of time, and then He determines when those things have served their purpose and they're done with. And if you remember, the fig tree is one of only 3 trees that we know for sure that existed in the Garden of Eden. And so we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we have the tree of life, and we have the fig tree. And we know that there was a fig tree because Adam and Eve covered themselves with fig leaves. And the fig tree then came to represent this idea of a covering that's inadequate. And if Jesus is he's in his, he's approaching his death. He's removing the inadequate covering because he's about to provide the real covering. Because remember that Jesus, or that God in the garden provided Adam and Eve with coverings of death, basically, and Jesus is about to do that. And really, I think it's important for us as believers to when we read the miracles of Jesus throughout the gospel accounts, that we don't just see these as, oh, these are neat magic tricks or something like that, but that these are things that are revealing the nature of God. And if we really take that seriously, what that does is it opens our eyes to the way that God is being revealed in the natural world all around us. It's just happening in a slower or bigger scale that makes it difficult for us to see. But once we see it in the smaller and more immediate scale of the miracles, we can have our eyes open to the things that God is doing all around us.